Thank you for joining our latest LEAP episode. We're pleased and fortunate today to be joined by Michael Watkins. He is a special cargo analyst with Maersk, and he also has leadership and executive experience with other shipping companies, such as APL and Hamburg Sud. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I guess we'll just start with your experience. Rewinding the clock a bit, how did you first get involved with shipping?
Wasn't sure what I really wanted to do after high school, whether I wanted to go straight to college or take a little bit of time off. It was, mid 70s, and that was a pretty common question. And somehow or another, I ended up being a cook on a non-union tugboat in the Chesapeake Bay. That's how I actually got started in the maritime business. I used to sail a bit when I was a kid, so I was familiar with the water, but actually got started in the maritime business as a cook on a deck on a tugboat. Yeah.
Doesn't get much more first and direct than that, I would think.
Or much more accidental. Yeah. But it was an odd place to start. But I stuck with that for a while, and at some point, after about 2.5 years, I think I kind of realized that I should at least attempt college, and so I did a couple of years at LSU, and then realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do either. So I went back to the tug up in the bay for about a year, and then back home to New Orleans, ran a bar for a couple of years, and then that's not good for your health long term. So I got a job working for what then was probably the largest shipping agency in the country, Strawn Shipping, in New Orleans, and did that for 2 years in New Orleans. Then I did some chartering work. Then Strawn asked me to come back and be ops manager in Charleston. Did that. Then 2 years after that, I went to work for Puerto Rico Marine, which was operating Ro-Ro service between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. Got some, kind of really firsthand management experience with the ILA and stowing those ships. Actually, a lot of fun. The most fun I ever had stowing vessels was with Premi.
Was that your favorite job, would you say, in logistics?
No. I mean, and I don't really even think of that as logistics. I think of that as, that's pure port operations, stevedoring, managing labor. It was fun. I think my favorite job was later on with APL, but once you kind of get the bug, it's a relatively small community. You tend to stay in that community and just keep learning and learning and learning. So yeah, I mean, I did special projects after Premi moved me to Miami. I did operations management there, including documentation, equipment, trucking and stuff. And then special project for a company called Tech Marine, starting a trucking company, running equipment in M&R. Then Crowley. Crowley, I started out with a Teamster warehouse operation in Miami, and then stevedoring, ship planning, in a lot of break bulk and out of gauge operations in Port Everglades as they open the terminal. Crowley, then to Jacksonville, and I ran equipment ops for the Caribbean and Central America. And I quit, and I went to work for a company in Atlanta running 2 rail ramps, tire operation, a container depot. And that was pretty good until the company basically went bankrupt, and learned a lot, but it was a tough break. I'm in Atlanta and nowhere to go. Then Crowley asked me to come back and go to Mexico for 4 years. So I went to Mexico and ran operations in Mexico for Crowley. And then, during that period with Crowley, we were getting into VSAs. We got into a VSA with APL, and it was one of those kind of issues where APL at that point in time was a big boat operator primarily. In the Americas, big boat back then was 5,000 Ts. And, the issues with APL and Crowley were really small boats. So it was a contentious relationship because they really weren't all that familiar with small boats. And so then APL just called me up and said, why don't you come do this for us? And I went to work for APL as a director of network and operations for Latin America. And that worked out well for 10 years, best 10 years of my career, I think. I tell my children if they have 10 years like that, they'd be lucky. I left because I didn't want to move to Panama. Basically, I wanted to stay in Miami. My family was comfortable here, and I went to work for King Ocean. I ran their terminal in Port Everglades for 4 years, and then where I met you at Hamburg Sud as head of logistics for that part of Latin America that does not include Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. And now, as you say, I'm still here in Miami and working for Maersk.
Quite the lineage, Michael. Yeah, thank you for kind of outlining that series of jobs and employment opportunities. And I'd like to just perhaps do a bit of a deep dive on that 10-year stretch. I mean, you mentioned it was very fulfilling and rewarding and just more than you expected. Could you explain some of the reasons for that and what some character traits in a job that other professionals could seek in a potential position?
I think the biggest difference, what set those 10 years apart, was that the Latin America division of APL was new. APL was primarily an East-West carrier. I think to some extent they got pressured by some of the the big box store accounts like Target and Walmart and whatnot to kind of expand their footprint to truly be a global carrier, and that was the genesis really of the LTAM creation and APL of a whole different division. And because it was new and because it was kind of separate and apart from the North America group, we were pretty isolated. That kind of left us short of some resources at the time, but it also left us without a whole lot of interference to kind of slow us down. So you got a bunch of people with a LTAM background wanting to grow and wanting to really accomplish some stuff. And we had a lot of energy. The energy created momentum. We were pretty clear on our mission. We were not going to be a typical box carrier. We were going to compete at a service level that was similar to the Crowleys and the Seaboards, the long-term LTAM players. And once that was kind of clearly communicated, and everybody was on board, we just kind of, by good fortune, by luck, by some work, had a great crew. Yeah, I mean, it was a tremendous group of people all focused on growing Latin America.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's important to have that collaboration with the work associates you deal with on these projects, and having that continuity and almost chemistry, I would think makes a difference.
The chemistry you develop over time, as long as the mission is pretty much clear, and as long as people are willing to put forth the effort. I mean, you can kind of coach everything but curiosity and effort. But if you've got a group of people who are, who if they're willing, there's nothing you can't do. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot you can accomplish. And we had that. I mean, the best way I can describe it is that after a couple of, maybe a year or so, we really didn't, as management, we didn't have to tell people what to do. We just had to ask them the right questions.
Wow.
And that was really, just one of the major things, is that recognizing the fact that, if people are curious, they'll figure it out on their own. If you ask them the right questions, they'll provide the answers, learn along the way, teach you something as well. And then everybody has kind of ownership in the success.
Well
said. It's a neat 10 years, gotta tell you.
Sounds like it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And even before that, it sounds like you were pretty open to mobility. And I'm curious, is that less and less an expectation nowadays with the influx of digitalization and how things are more remote, or is there a necessity there? And then would you attribute that mobility to your success of getting more exposed to different parts of shipping?
Well, I would certainly attribute the mobility to the exposure to the different parts of shipping, but I think the mobility really came from the fact that I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no clue. I know that I knew I did not want to settle down and do just one thing. And I wasn't really scared of moving. Didn't concern me all that much. And I just wanted to do different stuff. I mean, and it was all fun. I mean, it's a people-oriented business, whether you're doing stevedoring or equipment control or you're doing trucking. It's, yeah, if you're interested, you're curious, and you like people, and it doesn't matter if they really speak the same language as you do or not, you yeah, you can have a lot of fun. And I have to say, I think I had a lot of fun. My wife would tell you after moving 7 times in 8 years that it wasn't quite so amusing for her, but it was, yeah, I really did enjoy it.
Not a lot of dull moments, if anything, right?
No, no, several children along the way. Yeah, yeah. Two of the kids were born in Mexico, so it was it was it was quite a ride until I think I finally said I'm not moving anymore. Yeah, no.
Yeah, fair. That's it. That's
Mhm.
fair. And I think we always meet that point of understanding at a certain point in our careers. But it's such a leg up, in my opinion, that you had that opportunity to, move around and see different parts of the supply chain process and really lead those different elements too with teams and the like. And then I guess reflecting back into today's professional environment, would you still see a lot of value in that? Are there advantages to digitalization? What's the impact of this remote climate? Can you speak to some of those elements?
I think the access to data is extraordinary. Um, the ability to access that data is a skill that is absolutely imperative, and one that I don't think that I've developed as well as I need to or should have. But I also think that people are less reliant on hands-on experience and more reliant upon, because of so much data, reliant on managing by average. And you're never going to achieve excellence managing by averages. So I mean, there's some positive aspects of it, and I think there's certainly some negative aspects of it that aren't necessary. I mean, companies could still really make the effort to get people out there and exposed to the actual work that's being done, as opposed to isolating them from it, managing by averages. But yeah, I mean, it's a choice that management has to make, and from my perspective, I think they made the wrong choice by withdrawing from the actual work.
Mm.
But yeah, it's what big corporations do these days.
Yeah, fair. And I do think it would behoove organizations to bring a little more of that tangibility to the workplace, even if it's just getting some folks out to a terminal or a depot or seeing how the operation's conducted. That would go a long way of just relating to the work and shipping, and instead of it being more conceptual, where you're just looking at the data and the numbers and kind of handling things in a vacuum or siloed.
Yeah, I feel in a way very bad for planners these days, because when I was planning ships, I'd look out my window at the ship. Um, Somebody would have called me, the day before the ship and say, "Hey, look, this is the rotation. This is kind of a general idea of whether it's going to be first port Maracaibo, first port La Guaira." But you had to stow the ship, and you were looking at it, and when you finished the ship, you went home. Of course, with Crowley, it might be 36 hours after you started it, but in most cases, with like in an ILA environment, you went home after 12 hours or whenever the ship finished. But nowadays, a planner finishes a ship. He's sitting in a remote location, and he finishes the ship, and then he opens up another file and does another ship, and he may be 8,000 miles away from the ship that he's actually planning for the port call that the ship is going to make. So it's a much more removed from the actual operation profession than it used to be, and I think it creates more stress, and it's harder to really appreciate the work that you do. You don't see it. It's a
Yeah,
tougher
well
tougher
said.
environment now. I think it's much less fun.
Yeah, don't disagree. I mean, I was a vessel planner for a short while as well, and we were expected to go to the port and talk with the chief mate and discuss things with the captain of what the plan was at least every couple of weeks.
Mhm.
And we were right there. I mean, we were in a drive's distance, and you're right. Now you're dealing with different time zones, and it's more complex. So in some ways, it could dilute the ultimate end deliverable on the operational side. Um, So yeah, that's well summarized.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where, you locals cannot override a plan, even when there's something wrong, right? And even in our days at Hamburg Sud, we had folks in Chile, and if we had to squeeze something on, or a lake gate, or we really wanted to provide a specific service for a customer that, had invested a lot of its freight with us and deserved the additional effort. Hamburg Sud wasn't averse to saying, hey, give that local planner the opportunity to maximize the profile of the ship by accepting these 6 lake gates, whatever. In a lot of cases today, that opportunity isn't extended. I mean, it's a hard cutoff, and that's that. I mean, I think it's not totally cut off from providing excellent service, but it is more, hey man, we got to do this. We got to get there on this time. I can't give you 15 more minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you see, Maersk in particular, Gemini, man, the schedule integrity is paramount now. So it's a cutoff, and you make it or you don't make it, and the ship sails on time, and you trade off that additional service that you may have had the opportunity to provide. It's a trade off by saying, hey, listen, my ship's going to be where it's supposed to be when it's supposed to be there, and Mr. Customer, I think you're going to appreciate that schedule integrity more than you would have appreciated me squeezing that last box on for you. I don't know if the customer is going to feel that way. I hope so, but for Maersk's sake, but yeah, that's the way it is.
Agreed. So, going back to your previous experience managing large scale logistics operations and even teams, and it's so interesting what you say. It comes down to being a people business at the end of the day, even though we're dealing with all sorts of machinery and infrastructure. I'm just curious, what's kind of your philosophy on team development and team adhesion when it comes to managing groups of people, maybe veteran professionals in the logistics space, or even newbies that are kind of green and just learning about shipping and logistics? How did you really kind of balance that, and what are your kind of major themes when it comes to managing personnel?
I think I start with a quote that, I don't remember who told me, but somebody told me a long time ago that life is about managing relationships. If you can manage relationships effectively and sincerely, then again, there's nothing you can't do. Right? I think that the key to leadership is you stand behind your staff when things are going well. You stand in front of them when things are going poorly. And you never forget that attribution is probably the single most important thing when it comes to building trust within a group of people. And it doesn't matter how small a gesture of attribution it is. I mean, if you reached out to somebody for an answer to a particular question and they gave you that answer, you go back to the person who asked the question of you, and you make sure the person who gave you the answer is copied in on it and thanked in the first line of the email. Right? They might even be part of the conversation, but you just acknowledge the fact, right, that they helped you. Then I guess the second part and the second most important thing is to remember that somebody asking you for help is a hell of a compliment. And it really, it's not smart to refuse the opportunity to help someone. I mean, if it's a dumb question, it's a dumb question. And there are dumb questions that are born mostly out of laziness. But, 9 times out of 10, if somebody's asking you for help, that's another great way of building a team, is by being available to help and making sure that you're patient and you're thoughtful in your response and give them the benefit of your experience and, go on from there. But 2 biggest themes for me: attribution and acknowledging the fact that when someone asks you for help, they're paying you a compliment, and you should acknowledge that by giving them the help that they ask for.
That's so well said. Absolutely. And I think it's important too to be open and transparent with your team and not necessarily conceal information because you might be threatened by your team, right? And I think that
No,
falls into that same vein.
yeah, your job as a manager is to promote your team and you out of a job. If you do a really good job and you develop a team amongst which there are members who can take your place, you have really done your job, right? And if the company sees that and recognizes that, they should advance you. If you're trying to hold yourself above your team and constrain somebody within your team from advancement, yeah, you're doing exactly the opposite. You're actually being destructive to the group, to the trust, to the company itself. You're not doing your job. Management, it should never be about trying to sit still in one place. And it's also kind of important as a manager to remember, at the end of the day, you work for yourself, right? If you've developed a strong team and there are people who can take your place, and the company hasn't recognized the fact that you're worthy of advancement, then you're free to move. Every day that you did a great job, every day that you did 110%, you did it for yourself, right? Take that experience and find another opportunity. But yeah, never hold somebody in your team back, and always keep in mind your job is to work yourself out of a job.
Well said,
And
yeah. And it's like that old idiom, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that definitely correlates back to that messaging.
yeah, I mean, it you know, there are lots of egos in large groups of people, and not everybody thinks about uh, thinks in the same way, right? I mean, you work in a company where there are lots and lots of people. Generally speaking, people are good. People are receptive to helping others, but there are people who they stand in the way or whatever. But yeah, I think it doesn't matter if rising tide lifts all boats. Just do the right thing and keep in mind you work for yourself. And if all of your best efforts have not resulted in the progress that you are looking for, um, and you're honest with yourself in your assessment of your efforts, then go look for something else.
You've had, Michael, such an extensive level of involvement with working in shipping with some of our neighbors in North and or South rather
Mm.
and Central America. I'm curious how you navigated as an American some of the cultural realities and that community and kind of related to folks in a different way that was, let's say, beyond business, right? To make sure that the wheels of professionalism still churn. So just curious how that went in terms of your experience dealing with other cultures and communities.
Well, whenever I had to travel to another country, and there was a period of time there that I think I went to every country in Central and South America at least once a year, if not twice.
Wow.
So before I would leave, it used to be available. I don't know if it's still available, but there's typically a CIA country briefing that you can access online, and it's just kind of an up to date, you know, what's going on in the country, what's happening, whatnot. And I would read that because you can't visit somewhere and then invariably you're going to go out for dinner and then talk about how many moves you're going to do per hour on a crane. It's after a while it gets boring, and you kind of owe it to your host to at least be interested in their lives, in their country, and the environment wherever you are. And so I would make a point of doing that, and then I would actually make a point of saying to them that our success is in large part dependent upon them. That
Mm.
if I was talking with terminals, and whether it was Buenaventura or at the time the government run terminal in Callao or in Santos, the conversation was, you guys, particularly in Latin America, where the terminals have a lot of direct relationships with the customers and with the cargo itself. You guys are supposed to be so good that you put freight on my ship. I'm not supposed to have to come down here to tell you how to be a great service provider to your local customer. You guys are supposed to do that. I should never hear a customer complain to one of our salespeople that our terminal is subpar in service, particularly when there's another competitive terminal that the customers would say is better. That cannot be. we are not going to be the best container shipping line in the world if our terminal vendors are not the best terminal vendors in their competitive environment. That's, whether it's a terminal or whether it's a container depot, or, it doesn't matter whether it's an M&R service for reefer. If they provide poor service, the line is providing poor service. So it's
True.
Those are our conversations almost invariably. I mean, we talk a little bit about the politics of the country, what's going on. You try and stay away from one side or the other. You just listen, and then you talk about how are we going to be the best that we can be, and make sure that when you leave, you've left them with a clear understanding that, as far as I'm concerned, they're accountable, just as I am and just as the line is, to the success of the company. It's just, they're accountable too. They have to hold themselves to the highest possible standard.
Great. Yeah. And emphasizing that symbiotic relationship, which is so critical to what you just outlined.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the reasons why for 10 years at APL, we had such a great experience, is we were able to communicate that. We were able to actually align ourselves with longer term contracts with vendors, and persuade them that, I'm not going to hop from one depot or terminal provider to the other for 3 cents a move. I'm just not going to do that. You might not be the lowest cost provider, but if you're going to provide a service that is going to attract freight onto my ship or our ship, I'm going to go with you, because the differential between 3 cents and 600 more loads, it's a no-brainer, right? If you need help generating additional revenue, let's get together and see how we can figure out a way to generate additional revenue. You provide other services, and we'll use those services, provided they maintain the same level of quality that is required.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, I always kind of regretted the advent of procurement, because I felt like procurement reduced all those relationships to transactional, and I felt like it was just lazy. Because, I mean, there's a way to do procurement to where it's transparent, it's reviewed, and if you don't pick the lowest cost provider, you have to justify why. And we did that at APL. I think we did it really effectively, without robbing the local people of their power, their authority locally with the vendors, but still making sure that we got equal to or better service for equal to or lower rates, even though that we might have been 1/3 the size of our competition.
And that relationship building is so important there and pivotal. So yeah, I think that's something that could be leveraged more in today's environment, for sure, in terms of negotiations with vendors.
Yeah, it's more difficult today though, because the lines there are fewer lines, and there's also fewer terminals. So you have tremendous volumes concentrated in a smaller group of vendors, and really, to some extent, you're in a position where you're so big you can't move, right? Because nobody can take you without kicking somebody else out, and that creates a different dynamic altogether.
It's fair. Yeah, just so much consolidation that's taken place. It's really just profound in terms of that. So, just as a follow-up, if I might, Michael, to your experience with APL and how just fluid the communication was that a culture that already existed there in APL, or was it that you kind of drove that when you initially broke into that trade that you were managing? Or was it, I guess, a blend of both?
Well, I think communication internally within APL, and I would compare APL at the time that I joined them, and in a way, I wouldn't give up any of the experience that I have with Crowley, but it would have been great to have joined APL in like I don't know, 1994. One of the most creative, adventurous, bright group of minds imaginable. I mean, this is the company that built the first ship too big to go through the Panama Canal at the time. they drove the double stack train development. I mean, these are huge investments. And of course, when you make a huge investment, it's a huge risk related to that investment. I met people at APL who were just brilliant, and thankfully for me, really fortunately for me, people who kind of believe that when you're being asked for help, it's a compliment, and they kind of went out of their way to help me, even if Latin America wasn't really popular within the APL culture. Communication amongst people like that is really easy. And then when you're at APL in 2000, 2001, 2002, keep in mind, APL was at the time the biggest TP carrier, Trans-Pacific carrier in the world. I mean, APL was a big company and had an extraordinary reputation. Everybody wanted to work with us. If we were going into a country for the first time, everybody wanted to work with APL. We were well known, well reputed, and yeah, I mean, it was pretty easy.
High reputation, all that, yeah.
Yeah, and really well deserved. I don't know who's going to hear your podcast, but at the time, the guy who was running APL by 2002, the guy who was running APL was not a fan of Latin America, not, but still one of the smartest people I've ever had the good fortune to be abused by. He really did not like Latin America, but a really sharp guy and really good operator.
I guess you rubbed off to him a little bit too.
No, it'd be tough to rub off on Ron. He knew the business. He was very smart. He was just a little bit more certain of his opinion in Latin America than we would have liked. Right? We would have liked a little bit more support, but you can't take anything away from Widow's experience and his ability, his knowledge. That and APL was full of people like Ron Widows. It really, really top-notch company, and I don't know why they got bought by NOL and the Singaporeans, and I don't really know all the inside scoop of why they got why Temasek sold them to CMA, but I imagine between 1990 and 2007 or 8, there wasn't a more well-run container shipping line in the world. Top-notch people, really top-notch.
Well said. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, you've now ridden the wave of so much change in shipping, and I think some of that, if I might say, kind of happened to you versus you seeking out the change, whether it's acquisitions of companies, as you mentioned, or just movement of personnel and departments.
Yeah, that's I kind of laugh when I hear somebody talk about a career plan. Yeah, I mean, the plan. No, you can't. The plan is you work for yourself. Every day you do less than 100% of what you're capable of doing is a day that you did yourself a disservice. So keep that in mind, because you may plan to work for a company forever because you love it so much, and you know what? They just get sold, and then you're working for somebody else.
You kind of have to be flexible and understand, that change is a part of the shifting landscape of transportation. And certainly in this era. Yeah, fair.
Yeah. I never thought I'd work for Maersk. Never. No.
Well, they're lucky to have you, sir.
Well, don't know about that. I'm very grateful to that they've allowed me to stay on and do this, and it's been interesting. It's never thought I'd do pricing either, but here I am.
Yeah. It's funny. And I guess on that same vein of thought, Michael, what are some points of advice you could share to someone who's interested in breaking into the transportation or logistics industry? Whether they're a newer professional or even straight out of college, what are some tips you can share on what they could prepare themselves for, or what they should leverage in terms of their skills to network even within a company?
Yeah, I don't know that it's anything that I would advise somebody coming out of college or somebody leaving one industry to go into the shipping business. It's, you know, if you're not curious, don't come here. If you're not motivated because you're curious, don't bother. It doesn't matter where you go or what you do. Typically, the not curious, unmotivated don't do well wherever they go. If you are curious and you are motivated and you find yourself for one reason or other in the shipping business, there's no reason why you can't learn a great deal about yourself, about this industry, and take that forward to a very profitable future, whether it's within the container shipping line that you work for or any other business that you go to. But the first thing you have to make up your mind is you have to make up your mind that you're gonna work, you're gonna be curious, you want to learn, and yeah, if you're good with that, it doesn't matter where you are, where you go, you're gonna do well. And I guess the other thing is it's a people business. The most critical thing of success is that curiosity, that motivation, and life is about managing relationships. A lot of times your ego is going to be in third or fourth place. That doesn't mean you're not learning. That doesn't mean that you're somehow permanently injured. Kind of check your ego at the door. Make sure that when you want to exert yourself, that you've done your homework, you're well prepared. And then even if you don't carry the day, don't be terribly disappointed, because maybe the argument to your position was better than yours. But if I wouldn't say for the steamship for the shipping business now, it's no longer a steamship business, but for the container shipping business, it doesn't.
Technicalities.
It doesn't matter. It's just be curious, be motivated, be willing to learn, and just get to it.
Sound advice. Excellent. Well, Michael, really appreciate your time in discussing shipping and, with you passing along your expertise and wisdom. You're such a wealth of knowledge and information. And we're really fortunate to kind of, dive into that a little bit today.
It's been a few years in this business. But
I would say
again,
so.
like any business, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It just, you work for yourself. Just spend every day trying to learn as much as you can, and you'll do well.
Well said. Alrighty, well, appreciate the time, and thank you all for tuning in.
Right, man. My pleasure.